Hello, my name is Sheila Guillotone, and this is the Simsbury Woman. Today we're going to discuss a topic close to my heart, the education of young women. We live in a country that expects to educate our young women, and not just to perform domestic chores or to become leaders in areas that, even when I was a teenager, were not necessarily considered appropriate studies for women. Science, math, technology, and engineering are the foundation of the STEM programs. Yet, even in this country, there's a movement away from and criticism of this goal. We may consider education a basic right, yet persistent inequalities in education cripples the lives of women and children worldwide. Anyone who watches the news knows that there are places in the world where educating women is virtually and sometimes violently illegal. My guest today is an outstanding educator, the head of school of the Ethel Walker School right here in Simsbury. I'd like to welcome Dr. Meera Viswanathan. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Before we talk about the essence of what we're going to talk about, give us a little idea of your background, which is fascinating, and how you came to end up in Simsbury.
It's a serendipitous journey, I think. I was born in India, and we emigrated to this country, to Los Angeles, when I was 5, because my father was doing a PhD at UCLA.
Okay.
I did my education in Los Angeles, public schooling, and then went to college and university in the Bay Area. Came east for my first job as a postdoc and spent 33 years at Brown University. And during that time, my husband was headmaster of a school, and we founded a school together in Jordan. And all of that, I think, left me with a certain awareness of how exciting it was to be able to design a curriculum, and particularly the importance of education for girls. And so when the opportunity to come to Simsbury to Ethel Walker came along, I was fascinated. And when I visited Ethel Walker and saw the girls, utterly smitten. And so here I am 2 years later, working hard and even more committed to the goal.
Well, that's great. That's great. Simsbury residents drive basically through Ethel Walker's campus
Sure.
all the time. But I looked on the website and I had no idea that it had originally been founded in New Jersey, of all places.
Correct.
Give us a little idea of how you got from New Jersey, which I don't think it was there very long,
No, it wasn't.
to Simsbury, Connecticut, and that was a
Exactly.
while ago, so I can't imagine that was an easy place to find.
No, well, it was founded by Ethel Walker, who was a proud graduate of Bryn Mawr.
Okay.
And she graduated and looked around her and decided the year was 1911.
Okay.
And it was an important year for feminism around the world. Suffragettes were marching, women were talking about rights in Japan, in Egypt, in Europe.
They didn't have the vote yet, though.
No, they did not. And in
Okay.
fact, this was the agitation that led eventually to women securing the vote in many places. But it was in this year that Ethel Walker looked around and decided there were enough finishing schools for girls, but not enough academically rigorous institutions preparing girls for college and for an independent life. Should they end up not married? Should they end up working? She felt that it was important for women to be able to be self-sufficient. And it was a very brilliant and novel vision for the time.
God bless Ethel Walker.
Exactly right. And so Ethel Walker School was born. She ended up marrying, and the school moved from New Jersey, as you said, to Simsbury, where Ethel Walker, now Smith, the family had a house and estate.
Oh, okay.
And so this was the land that was procured, and hence the school was born. And it was committed to that notion of academic rigor. It was also committed to a couple of other things she believed in. She believed in the notion of girls and activity. and particularly equestrian activities.
Yes, and we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
Right.
And so she established a barn, and she's often portrayed in her jodhpurs with her dogs and her horses by her side.
Okay, I like that. Okay. Well, I'm going to lead right into what was the heart of our discussion earlier, and that is you have very specific ideas about educating girls in single gender institutions. I was a product of one of those, except my education was more in the line of a finishing school. And so I really want to hear a lot more about, I mean, I felt I was very badly, I didn't realize it at the time, but I felt I was very badly shortchanged in the academic area. And I didn't know about that until I got to graduate school, really.
Right.
Tell us exactly where you find the strengths of the single gender institution.
Exactly right. Having grown up in co-ed education, I spent most of my life believing that was the best way, the way for greatest opportunity for both boys and girls. But one of the things I realized in my own upbringing is that until the age of 12, I was a fairly loquacious and active and chatty girl who was always willing to scrap and take on an argument.
Okay.
Suddenly, when puberty hit, and of course boys and girls experience that differently, I found I and many of my female classmates went silent.
Really?
We continued to be academically very sort of successful, but not necessarily vocal in the classroom. And that continued when I was an undergraduate at Stanford. It continued even as a graduate student. And I think it took me decades to recover. And one of the curious things I noticed in my decades of teaching at Brown is that I could tell in the first week of every semester, just by observing the students, which young women had been to an all-girls education or had been homeschooled on the one hand,
Really?
and which girls had been to a co-ed institution. And it had to do with a couple of things. It had first and foremost to do with their comfort in their skin, that they weren't feeling uncomfortable, awkward, but more importantly, I would say the voice. And it was the ability to use their voice fully, calmly, to be able to pursue a point, to take up as much space and time as they needed. And I was fascinated that with 90% accuracy, I could tell every semester.
Really?
And so some people may think that an all-girls education is a quaint fossil relic of the past. I think it's just the opposite.
Really?
The reason I'm here is because I believe it's in the vanguard of education. And I think that, you know, in the words of Queen Rani of Jordan, she said, "I've always thought that when you educate a girl, you empower a nation." And Drew Gilpin Faust, the president of Harvard, says something similar. She said, "Educating women is smart. Educating women changes the world." And so I think it's important to think about that word educate, because the very word educate in Latin comes from educare, a verb which the root is to lead out. So to educate is not about becoming sealed in an ivory tower. Education is about movement. It's about change. It's about leading out. It's about leadership. And it's that notion that you are in pursuit of truth, of understanding, and ultimately, and this is my view, of positive change in the world.
Okay. You know, as I said, I had a very different experience, but I also had an experience where the options that were given to us were you could be a nun. Well, that was never going to happen. You could be a social worker, a teacher, a secretary, maybe a dietitian. That's it. I mean, there were not a lot of options that were offered.
Exactly.
Now, at what point do you think there was a switch? I mean, there had to have been a switch.
Well, you know, I think about Barbie. Do you remember Barbie dolls?
I remember Barbie. I didn't have any, but I remember.
I remember getting a Barbie doll. It was my prized possession when I was 7 years old. And I remembered the little books that came with it that described uniforms and they were careers. And you could have Barbie the nurse.
Ah.
Didn't have Barbie the doctor initially.
Okay.
You could have Barbie the flight attendant, which was then called a stewardess.
A stewardess, right, of course.
You could have Barbie the opera singer. You
Oh.
did later have Barbie the astronaut.
Oh.
And so it was interesting to me. It was the beginning of thinking about change in those careers. We began to see just the beginnings. But you're quite right. The key with education is to have as wide a spectrum of choice as possible. And I think that blinders get put on, and some we are socialized. If you, for example, ask a girl if she knows about subject X or Y, if she has 50 or 60% knowledge, she will deny all awareness of it.
Really?
It's only if she has 90% comprehension will she say, yes, I know about so-and-so.
Really?
Typically, if you ask a boy,
Yeah.
even if the knowledge base is 20 or 25%, he'll say, yes, I know about that. I can tell you all about it. And
Now, where does that come from?
Well, we can argue nature, nurture, a variety of things. But what's interesting to me is that boys more often than not will say that and then will sort of learn on the job and be able, whereas girls will hold back. And so the question is, one, of course, as you say, is what is the provenance? Where did it come from? But I think the bigger question for me is, what do we do with it? And so I think about my driving. I would say that I've never had a ticket. I've never caused an accident. And yet I would put my driving skill at 55%.
Interesting.
It's a skill I use every day, but am I extraordinarily adroit? No. Am I competent? Yes, I am. So one of the things I want to do at Walkers is not only have girls aspire to that wonderful high-level performance in certain areas, but I want them to think about a whole range of skills at which they can be functionally masterful, but not necessarily at the 80th or 90th percentile. And so, for example, one of my goals for all girls at Walkers is coding. And a lot of talk is given to coding. People use that as a kind of shorthand.
My husband is a systems analyst.
There you go.
Yep. And I have no idea what he's talking about.
Right. Well, to write code used to be an esoteric practice limited to computer scientists.
Yes.
But I can tell you, for undergraduates now, every undergraduate at university needs to be able to write code to be able to do their homework, not just in computer science classes, not just in science classes, but even in social science classes. If you take environmental studies, your homework is going to mandate that you be able to write code.
Really?
If girls are going to college without knowing how to do this, they are suffering from a serious sort of short setback. And so my goal is that every girl at Walkers will learn to write code at a functional level. By the junior year in a language, it can be C++, but more likely it'll be something like Python or Java.
Okay.
And the reason, of course, is because A, you will need it. B, it's a great lucrative back pocket skill. And I
Okay.
think girls should have that.
Yeah.
And three, again, it's about functional mastery, that you can learn new things.
Okay.
And this century is going to demand from all of us, not just young people, that we be able to recreate ourselves to learn new things constantly, whether it's a new device, whether it's a programming language, whether
Right.
it's a way of thinking. And so we need to become creative, active learners, and to realize it's not just the repository of what we learned 20 years ago, but it's what's happening now.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want girls to have. And so that's why it's important for all girls to have that functional mastery across a broad variety of skill sets.
And that's very, I had no idea about the coding. And I mean, I consider myself technologically adept.
Sure.
But the coding part, I hadn't really thought about. But that's very interesting. You talk about leadership, and in this day and age, especially with this political climate and more women starting to get, sometimes for the first time, into politics, how do you get women to understand what leadership is, what skills do they need? How do you encourage your girls to go for something that requires them to be the boss?
Exactly. And many of our girls are phenomenal leaders, but never saw themselves as leaders originally. So part of it is seeing yourself as a leader, recognizing the possibility, and then being able to step up to that wonderful role. I think the key watchwords for great leaders are, first of all, an ability to listen. if you're a leader, you need to think about your constituency. You need to be able to hear their concerns and why they have those concerns. 2, you need to be able to think about your own skill set in a realistic way. In what ways can you take forward, can you lead out, can you educate by being a leader? And that may be by harnessing your verbal skills, your writing skills, your abilities to interact one-on-one, your persuasive ability, your ability to model the very values that you're trying to teach. And I think all of those are things our girls do. One of the interesting things about girls and leadership to me is that so much leadership now is no longer the solo man leadership, but is a much more collaborative form. And in 2011, I think it was, the Harvard Business Review did a wonderful research piece by 2 professors of management, Anita Woolley at Carnegie Mellon and Tom Malone at the Sloan School at MIT. And what they were looking for is to see what allowed groups to be able to solve problems successfully. What qualities distinguish groups that were successful problem solvers. And they discovered it was not necessarily having the highest number of PhDs in the group. It was not having the largest number of smart IQ people, or even the highest IQ. The only thing that really distinguished successful groups from non-successful groups was the presence of 1 or more women. I found that fascinating.
Really?
And it has, and why we can argue, I think, and require a great deal more research. But what it said to me was that in a world in which we recognize that so much of what we do, including research at universities, is crowdsourcing, and that so much collaboration is going to be required, that women are going to be playing an extraordinarily important role. And that women's forms of leadership, which may be parallel to, overlapping, or distinct from traditional, quote, male forms of leadership, are going to be vitally necessary.
Now, how much, and it's, maybe I'm wrong, but how much pushback, and it seems like the pushback, the higher the women get, whether that's politics or university or company, it seems like the pushback gets harder the higher you go.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think there's resistance. And, you know, I think there's resistance of various sorts. It can be built around the issue of gender. It can be built around national origin, religion, class, you know, goes on, race,
right.
on and on and on. But I think we're challenging those models in different ways. The question is not just seeing a leader who belongs to a group that traditionally would not have occupied that role. The question is the form of leadership. And so one of the things I'm trying to model at Ethel Walker is a different form of leadership, a form of leadership that's less hierarchical. Doesn't mean that there's no hierarchy, but less hierarchical, and one in which all comments are welcome as long as they're constructive and respectful in nature of one another.
Okay.
And I think that's very important. I'll give you an example.
Please.
I often quote to the students a story from my family lore, and the gist of it is where my great-grandfather persuaded my grandfather, who'd run away from home to Bombay, to come home, and he sent a telegram, which was very expensive, and the telegram had only 6 words. It said, "Health first, education next, prospects last."
Oh.
And my grandfather, who was a rather willful child and his father was very controlling, managed to heal over that telegram. Well, I told that to the girls, and this last fall we had a change in schedule that I had instigated.
Okay.
And it did not play out the way we had thought it was going to play out. And it produced challenges for a number of girls, including very shortened lunch periods. And the students wrote an op-ed piece in their online newspaper, and the caption was, "Ms. Viz, you said health first, question mark, question mark, question mark." And someone said to me, "Are you angry?" I said, "Angry? I love it. This is exactly what I've been wanting the girls to do."
Sure.
Which is, of course, what does it say about a girls' school where they can call out their head in a respectful way,
Yes.
but in a very sincere, pointed way? That's exactly right. This is the kind of voice I want them to use. in the world.
That's great. Well, I know we're getting short on time, and I absolutely want to know more about Jordan.
Please.
And I understand you have been awarded the King Hussein Medal, and you've spent time in Jordan. Please tell me about that.
Well, this was another improbable serendipitous event. My husband had been the headmaster of Deerfield, where the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, had attended. And the year after he ascended the throne, he came to deliver a commencement address. And while we were sitting at breakfast...
At Deerfield?
At Deerfield.
Okay.
And while we were sitting at breakfast, he looked around and said, you know, I'd like to build a school just like this in Jordan. Will you come and consult? And of course, we were happy to agree, and 9/11 happened, which set us back a couple of years. But in 2003, we went out, and we went with a number of people and looked at a potential venue for the school, and came home thinking that was very satisfying and good luck to them, until a few years later, when my husband was stepping down as head, the king approached him and said, I'd like you to be the founding head.
Wow.
And he said to me, why don't you write the curriculum? Why don't you be the architect of the curriculum? And
Now, is this a girls' school, boys' school?
No, it was a co-ed school.
Co-ed
and in fact,
school,
the king was committed to that, though when he had attended Deerfield, it was all boys.
Interesting.
And he was committed to co-ed, and he was committed to financial aid, which was a radical change in that region. Virtually no school offers need-based financial aid.
Wow.
And he was so thoughtful about that and the way it played out. So we went, and we spent a total of 4 years. The first year I made 8 or 9 trips, and Eric lived in Jordan. The next 2 years I took a leave from Brown and lived there and taught and was dean of the faculty. And then the last year I made a number of trips too.
Wow.
But it's a thriving school. We went back in October for the 10th anniversary of the founding.
Now, did you bring any of the girls from Walker with you?
Not for that trip, unfortunately. It was right in the middle of the term. It was fairly short. But I'd love for our girls, and in fact, John Austin, the head of King's Academy now, and I talked about an exchange, and also with exchanges with girls' schools in Jordan.
Okay.
So.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I personally think that travel is incredibly beneficial. And I am always stunned when I hear people, in fact, on the news this morning, I heard one of the news people say she'd never been overseas. I was like, really? Wow. I mean, that just makes no sense. One other thing we really have to talk about is the equestrian program.
Sure.
My daughter, like a lot of kids in Simsbury who went to Simsbury Public Schools, did in fact take riding lessons at Walker.
How great.
Yeah. Scared me to death, and I also happen to be deathly allergic to horses, so it wasn't a fun time for me. But there are things about, and you alluded to Ethel Walker's own personal belief. Why is, and what is it about equestrian, I don't know what you call it.
Activities.
Activities, thank you. That you consider important?
I think the process of interacting with a sentient being that is not human, that is not capable of articulating your wishes, its wishes, and working with that sentient creature to be able to achieve a particular goal is a very powerful experience. And I've seen this time and time, the process of having to care for a horse. And so it's not just a question of girls mounting a horse and learning to ride.
Right.
It's the actual caring for the horse, it's the saddling up, it's the hosing down of the horse and making sure its needs are met. That I think is a powerful lesson. Any, what shall I say, residual squeamishness, you need to get over.
Yeah.
But also it teaches courage. And one of the things I did when I got to Walker's, of course, riding has never been a part of my life because of where I came from and the kind of family, perhaps. But I was determined that if I'm going to be the head of a school in which equestrian activities are important, I had better learn to ride.
Okay.
And so I've started taking lessons, and you're right, it scares me to death. But if I'm teaching our girls to be bold, I had better model that boldness myself.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful. I also think it goes a long way towards what has become an epidemic of animal cruelty, which seems to then translate into just cruelty.
I think that's right.
Across the board.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been fascinating. I absolutely am delighted. I'd love to have you back sometime. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, and as I said, we've barely scratched the surface of the topic. It is complex, and And as we can see, it's even controversial at times. Fortunately, we have well-educated women like Dr. Viswanathan, there we go, to help us clarify positions and aspirations. For more information on the extraordinary work being done in this area, I would recommend that all our viewers take a look at the Ethel Walker School website. The focus on leadership and the worldwide outreach that the school engages in should make us all proud of our town and its excellent educators. Thank you, Doctor, and for giving us your time today. And I wish all our viewers a very productive day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Great.
When hope becomes a reality, it is almost impossible to honor adequately the one who had courage to pursue the vision. To found a school is brave, even under the most ideal of circumstances. But to do so with not much more than hope took more than determination. It took a rare combination of courage and faith. Ethel Walker's vision of a changing world for women inspired her to create a school where young women would receive a rigorous preparation for college and to create the foundation for lifelong learning and intellectual curiosity. This commitment to a challenging academic program strongly resonates among today's faculty and remains central to the Walkers' mission. Ethel Walker chose Nullas Horas Nisi Orias as her school's motto, which means none but golden hours. For more than 100 years, the Ethel Walker School has been inspiring young women to make a difference in this world. Members of this diverse community are dedicated to scholarship, the arts, athletics, wellness, and service. As the 13th head of the Ethel Walker School, Walkers beckon me in a way that few schools have ever done. The ethos, energy, and devotion to learning at Walkers is irresistible. Whether in class, the dorms, or on the fields, one sees wonderfully strong, capable young women with little time for self-doubt. Here, every girl is celebrated, cherished, and cheered for by one another. The Ethel Walker School empowers girls to lead with integrity, respect, confidence, courage, conviction, and love of learning. May it continue, amid the numerous challenges evident in the world around us, to be a flagship of learning for young women. May every one of our future hours be golden.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.